to bring you all updates coming out of the conflict in Europe. We now move over to the United States for our next update, where the Democratic governor of the U.S. state of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker, has said that President Donald Trump's plan to deploy troops to Chicago is an abuse of power. He also said that there is no emergency that justifies the National Guard being sent to Illinois, and the U.S. president is attempting to manufacture a crisis. Adding on, Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson said that the city government has grave concerns about any deployment of troops, labeling the president's approach as uncoordinated, uncalled for, and unsound. He also said that the unlawful deployment, quote, could inflame tensions between residents and law enforcement and threaten the progress that the city has made in reducing crime. Meanwhile, Trump has already deployed around 2,000 troops to Washington, D.C., where the local government is controlled by Democrats as part of his crackdown on crime in U.S. cities. Trump said that he would implement the policy in Chicago and also in New York City. We're once again joined by Mark Sutherland. Mark, there does seem to be a pattern here. Donald Trump has said that there is a crime problem in these cities. That may be true for some of them. However, in Washington, we have seen that he has deployed these troops to that of the National Mall next to famous monuments where places seem to be relatively safe. All of the cities that he has deployed these troops, they are Democrat-led cities. Is this an abuse of power by Donald Trump, as J.B. Pritzker, the Illinois governor, seems to put it?
Very interesting when you look at Chicago, Thomas, if you look at the history of Chicago, in the past it used to be called Chirac for the amount of the murder rate that would go on in Chicago. Chicago has a very, very interesting history in regard to left-wing politics and the influence of that on the rest of the United States. Many people have been concerned about some of the awful crime in regard to the murder rate. There's been some appalling incidents when you would then have houses, machine guns, and children thrown into baths just to make sure that they're kept alive within these kind of incidences. I'm not exaggerating if people go through the history. And what you're alluding to, I understand that, and we've discussed this, you and I, in regard to the fact that is it an overreaction in Washington, D.C., because the crime rate, it may be not as high as people perceive. It's about actually saying to the Democrats, and we go back to the BLM riots in the first administration, this whole thing of pushing when you're going to defund the police and actually lowering the morale of police forces within America, within democratic cities. And remember with what we've then recently seen in California as well. It's all part of that ethos that says, no, I am not happy with this. We have to then deal with this. Then, as you quite rightly say, it's this whole thing of the deployment of the National Guard, and people need to ask themselves and say, well, what do the police forces need on the ground? Are they being actually properly equipped by the Democratic mayors, et cetera, to do the job that needs to be done in the eyes of President Trump? And then they would turn around and say, well, maybe you're holding back funding. So it's a real tit for tat politically, but unfortunately, there is huge crime in Chicago, and sadly, people get killed. Thomas,
of course, Mark. However, I just want to highlight the statistics. Compared to last year, I mean, Mark, Washington D.C. we have a decline in 27% in homicides compared to last year from Washington D.C. and a decline in 31%. In Chicago. These aren't mere numbers. These are pretty significant declines in homicides from both cities. And now we're yet to get further information about the New York deployment of the National Guard. However, what we do know is there is certainly fear from Donald Trump that a new mayor or candidate, there's a possibility of him coming in, Zoran Mamdani, who Donald Trump has been very much vocal about, and he is an anti-Trump candidate. This can be seen as very much political. There certainly is there not a danger here, Mark, of certainly signs of authoritarianism here?
You can easily argue that. I take your point very much so. But there's also this whole thing of I will not tolerate crime, and that the American people, when they voted him in, asked him to then deal with it. And as I have discussed with you in the past, it's a relationship where the ex-New York Mayor Giuliani is a very dear friend of his. And when the New York crime rate was sorted out, it was then, when you saw a smashed window, it was immediately repairing that, and etc. And yes, you're quite right to point out those statistics. The fact that we're even sadly discussing, the murder rate has gone down, but the murder rate is still unacceptable, and we could apply that to many, many countries across the world. But that is because within the is something very difficult for some of us to understand, the whole ethos of the right to bear arms. But Chicago has had this crime problem in regard to the murder rate for a long time. But if the figures are coming down, that's good, but let's get those figures down to absolute zero. And for the Democratic mayors, Democratic authorities to make that a priority instead of making it a political football. But I hear the arguments when people are throwing the figures at each other. But let's deal with the issue, and let's deal with the crime that's on the ground, is what I believe that people of the United States are actually asking for in this situation, and in a number of other cities. They've still got the memory of the riots over BLM recently, with what's happening in California in regard to the ICE agents and the crackdown on illegal immigration. They are all part of why people voted for President Trump, Thomas.
Mark, pleasure having you on the program as always. Always look forward to our discussion.